apparently over in Statesville right now, there's a debate going on for the in the chairman's race. And there's about 3 folks that are running for vice chair. And we only had one of each up until about a month ago, and then a couple other people on each end jumped in. So it's going to be an interesting convention. I want to start off with updates from elected officials. Our treasurer, Alan Page, isn't here tonight, so we don't have a treasurer's update, but we've got a couple of elected officials in the room, so we'll start with Eddie Boswell.
It's good to be here tonight. Eddie Boswell, Alamance County Commission. Looking forward to our program tonight. Convention next week. Everybody's vying for that vote with the state GOP, so I don't know where y'all stand on it, but it's interesting that there's enough people looking to get into leadership. I think that's going to be very important next year. Thank you.
Lee Kimmery, Council, City of Grant. Just want to let everyone know that we have agreed upon a budget to submit to the public for their approval. In that budget, there is not going to be a tax increase on property. There is going to be a 2% increase on water and sewer, and about a $2.75 increase on garbage pickup. Unfortunately, that is just to offset tipping fees. We are looking at the final plan for the 9, which is now, I mentioned this to this group last month. We have, as you may be aware, a wonderful opportunity at Hall Fields, which is down the North Carolina Commerce Park. We have the plans. The plans have actually came in and been revised several times. Those plans are much bigger than we originally anticipated. Those plans are close to 900,000 square feet facility located in Hall Fields, which is a joint effort between Alamance County, City of Medley, and City of Grant. So we're excited about that. Benny?
A little small building.
Yeah.
All right. Before we get started with our speaker, I did want to mention the appointments for the Board of Elections are up here at the end of May, and I'll consult with the other officers, and it's our intention to reappoint the 2 members that we have on there now. Board of Elections is 3 folks. You have the Democratic Party gets a selection, the Republican Party gets a selection, and then the third selection is determined by whoever has the governor's office, and since Republicans have the governor's office, we get to pick a second person. So I'm going to be reappointing Doug Kenn, who is currently the chairman of the Board of Elections, and Mr. Dawson Rouse, who is, I want to point him out here, he's in the back of the room here, very strongly waving. Right here. He's also currently on the Board of Elections. He's been on for about a year, and will be reappointed. We're glad that you're here, and glad that you're serving on the Board of Elections. He's an attorney locally in town. You work on
I have a law license. I was working with Keith Whitehead, but I currently work with the Department of Veterans Affairs, which I hope nobody will hold against me.
We need good Republicans in the Department of Veterans.
That's right.
At least you have a job for life if you're trying to straighten it out.
All right, well, I'm excited for the speaker that we have today, Mr. Kenn. Kenn ran for Congress last year in the Republican primary. He also is a veteran, member of served in the U.S. Air Force. He was a Russian linguist for a number of years. He's worked on various intelligence matters, has advised U.S. senators, and has a strong background in international affairs. And very happy to have him here tonight, Kenn.
I appreciate that. It's always nice to be back up here in Alamance County. I live down outside Jamestown, Sedgefield, but it's always nice to get out of there and go somewhere where there's some nice people. Appreciate the opportunity to come and speak on some topics which are very near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure they are to yours as well. With regard to Russia, as I said, I was in the intelligence field for a few years, working with all the classified agencies. So I'm very intimately familiar with Russia. I speak the language. I even negotiated with some of Putin's ministers a few years back. So this is really near and dear to me. So, but also ISIL, whatever the president wants to call it this week. I want to talk about that a little bit. A lot of times political speeches, this isn't one of them, but it's hopefully a discussion. Someone reminded me, they're normally like horns on a steer, a point here, a point there, and in between nothing but bull. Well, I'd like to try and point out a lot of my points that I want you to take away from here, because I'll be giving you some other facts and statistics, which I'm sure you probably won't remember, nor would I expect you to. When I used to teach law school, I used to do a Socratic method. You know what that is?
Yes.
You know, I always say I do that because I have to keep the students awake. Here, hopefully, the subject matter is interesting you. You'll still be awake. But every once in a while, when I give speeches, I've been doing this now for about 40-some years, I would look in the back, primarily in the back, and I know it's time to quit when I see people doing this. Like that. Okay, now it's time to stop. So hopefully I won't see any of that. Just pull the hook and tell me it's done. What I'd like to talk about with Russia, just a few things, and they all pertain to foreign affairs. I spent, like I said, quite a few years dealing with foreign affairs, foreign relations, and in order to have, whether it's the U.S. or any country, to have an effective foreign affairs policy, you have to have three main points. And this is one of the takeaways I want you to keep in mind when you listen to Fox News and everyone else dealing with foreign relations that's going on right now. The first thing you have to have is an understanding that all foreign relations and all foreign events are interrelated. Nothing happens in a vacuum. When you're talking about Iran, you're talking about Russia, you're talking about China, you're talking about Australia, it all is interrelated. And why is that? Because the world is now shrunk. Militarily, economically, politically, and socially, we're all basically now one world. So nothing Obama does here is not going to affect something over here, a concept he does not understand yet. Second point is, nothing you do in foreign relations, everything you do in foreign relations will also have an equal effect on domestic relations in the United States for the same reason. The third thing, and his primarily fatal flaw in his policy, is that to have an effective foreign policy, you have to totally understand the character, the motivations, the capabilities, and the intent of the target that you're applying that foreign policy to, whether it's ISIS or Russia or Iran or any other country. If you don't understand where they're coming from, any kind of policy you put in place is nothing but an accident. That's why I call his policy foreign affairs by accident. All he does is try and do something and then he reacts to it. He doesn't think it through and have a cohesive policy to go toward the results he wants. Some of the politicians that I really follow and I like and I read a lot about, one of which is Winston Churchill. During World War II, Winston Churchill simply said, it's nice to have a strategy, but just every once in a while you must check the results. And if the results are not what your strategy intended, you've got to change the tactics. So that's what we're not doing here. We're not changing any of the strategy or tactics in order to get to the results we want. Obviously, nothing, I can't honestly say any of these situations, whether it be ISIS or Iran or Russia, is caused directly by any of our foreign policy failures. I can't say that, in all fairness. However, I can say with certainty that our foreign policy is exacerbating and enabling and encouraging what's going on out there. We have always been a major power in the Middle East, and the power we have in the Middle East is a military power, political presence, and a support function. We are now failing in all these. The biggest thing is only giving lip service to support of Israel. That is encouraging ISIS and encouraging Iran to do what they want to do. So unless you have the foreign policy which includes in it a military might capability as a deterrent factor, we never use military might, we never have, solely for the purpose of using it or arbitrarily. But we always have it, as Reagan said, might is a good deterrent. So that's one of the things that our current president missed and our Congress needs to pick up and make sure that we increase our national defense capability. Everyone, you keep hearing the phrase leading from behind. Well, I kind of disagree with that. And one, because it's an oxymoron. But number two, this president has not been leading from behind, up front, or any other position. So I don't really think that that's a correct characterization of our foreign policy. We have none. Now, obviously, the president is someone who is charged under the Constitution with foreign relations. However, Congress has a position as well. And I share the blame with both of them. We have a president who's disengaged, and we have a foreign policy of appeasement. And that doesn't work. Then we have a Congress who's paralyzed by a lack of leadership and doesn't have the courage or the will to stand up and do what they should be doing to push the president in the right direction. You know, a little bit of history, as you all know, the Sons of Liberty, started with 8 people. 8 people started the movement which led to our country, as great as it is. You can't find 8 people out of 435 in Congress right now that are willing to stand up and risk their life and their fortune and their political position to do what's right. That's horrendous. And that's what we need. We need people that are going to stand up to ignore everybody else and say, no, that's not what we're going to do. This is what we need to do. We need to push the president. We can't just let him do what he wants to do. Now, let me just make one last comment about Obama's foreign policy. A lot of people, you hear on Fox News, everyone talk about how horrible it is. Well, every time I think about foreign policy, I keep thinking about a flashback to an incident I had with my wife. She's not here, so I can tell this. When we first started dating, she's born and raised in the South. I wasn't, although I spent about 15 years in the South now. And I remember doing something, I forget what it was, and she just looked at me, smiled, and said, "Bless your heart." And I just said, "Thank you," and she laughed. And it wasn't for a couple of years later when I realized what that really meant. So, with regard to Obama's foreign policy, bless his heart. Let me give you a little bit of background just on Russia real fast as to why Putin is doing what he's doing. And if you understand the Russian people, the mentality, and where they are, you can not only know why they're doing it, but you can predict what they're going to do. The Center for Study for Public Policy, the only reputable polling company in Russia, in 2014 gave the following statistics. 73% of them have a negative opinion of the United States. 70% of them said Russia should restore itself to the great empire of the USSR. 58% Russia is going in the right direction. And only 28% polled say they want a Western-style free market economy. And these are people that are obviously now in the generation that are post the wall. So that's disturbing. Pew Research, which is U.S., and of course they're reputable, they found that 94% believe that Crimea and Ukraine belong to Russia. So that means that an incursion into Ukraine and to take over Crimea is justified. And you're not going to change that opinion. 83% have confidence in Putin. 83%. What's Obama's confidence rate? Well, depending who you talk to. 30s, 40s. 78% of those polled approve of using Russian military to obtain those results, meaning Crimea and Ukraine. 15% have a favorability rating of Obama. 15%. It's getting close to ours. Putin has been on record numerous times with Der Spiegel and a bunch of other agencies saying that the demise of the Soviet Union is a catastrophe. 70% of those over 50 said that they want the Soviet Union to return. Now, a couple of real quick things about Russia's military budgets. Between 2004 and 2014, they doubled their defense budget. Now, let me go back in time. Between 1941 and 1945, when there was a little conflict going on, they spent 1/10 of the budget that they are now spending and projected to spend by 2020 on military hardware and equipment. They've already increased their budget this year by 21%. They are now spending anywhere between 25% to 30% of their GDP on military defense. We're spending 5%, 6%. The race is on. I predict we will be back into another Cold War. Putin promised, and this is a quote, to increase spending to support foreign policies and convey the image of an active global superpower. They are losing face, especially in light of sanctions, so they must do what they can do to come back up into the world's eyes, and that is militarily. He increases spending to support domestic political position. Like I said, he's already has a good favorable rating. However, the Duma, their Congress, has already come out on record in saying that they want to return to the USSR. And they have a plan on doing that, and I'll explain that in a minute. They also need to increase military spending for two other reasons: to fight terrorism. They have their own terrorism problem on their borders, and they got to stop that. And they also need to increase getting military equipment so that they can sell it. Now, who are they going to sell it to? Not us. They're going to sell it to Iran. They're going to sell it to ISIS. They're going to sell it to North Korea. They're going to sell it to China. Where's that all going to end up? With ISIS. So that's why it's important that we find a way to shut down Russia. I have a whole list of what the Russian military, from my intelligence sources, tell me they're going to be buying, and believe me, this would be a DoD wish list to die for, what they're going after. And all these things are going to help them. Their political, their Congress, their Duma, the United Russian Party, which is Putin's party, which started in right around 2001, they are losing seats every year. So in order to get keep control of the Duma, he has to do what his backers, old line, want him to do. So that's why he's taking over territory. That's why he's increasing the military budget at the expense of these citizens. I'll explain that too. The Communist Party is gaining 8% per year in the Duma. So now you're starting to see a reversal of what we saw when the wall came down. And I think that's primarily due to our foreign policy of appeasement and letting them do what they want to do. The Russian sanctions, I'll get into this and we'll get into ISIS. Here's why the Russian sanctions that they put on, first of all, Obama's sanctions were put on to stop the incursion into Ukraine. Okay? They have not worked, and they will not work. And the sanctions that they put on were aimed at individuals who own Russian companies. They weren't put on Russia. They weren't put on the products of Russia. They were put on individuals. And again, it's not working. I put out an article which Brent Bozell published on his website, a detailed analysis of this. If you ever want to read it, you can go to his cnsnews.com and look up my article. But here's the reasons why the Russian sanctions that we have so far won't work. First of all, Putin does not fear or trust Obama. He doesn't fear. He knows he's not going to do anything. Russia sees U.S. Congress as disjointed. Fact. They see U.S. Congress is not in line with what Obama wants to do. Thank God, fact. Putin has a very high favorability rate. He sees success in Ukraine without much pain. And it's another comment from Winston Churchill. War will occur when a country believes that the price of their aggression is cheap, and the possibility of indifference is high, and that's why Russia's doing what they're doing. Russia's financially struggling, but they survived economic collapse before. In 1998, their banking system basically broke down. they came back from that rather quickly. There's political pressure in Duma to unify Russia, and by the way, I'll get into that too, but they're trying to not only take over Ukraine, but by the way, it's Novaya Russia. They're trying to bifurcate Ukraine into 3 parts, and they just want to have a separate state of the ones that they took over. And the reason why they want to do that is because that gives them access not only to the freshwater port, but then they have a straight line for their oil pipelines coming from Crimea up into Europe. Okay. Europe, the EU, is the largest customer of Russian oil and gas. If you do something to shut down Russia, who's going to benefit, or who's going to be hurt? EU and us. Putin has said in some closed-door sessions that I'm aware of that he wants to act short-term before the EU, one, is strong enough economically to impose sanctions. Number 2, before Obama is out and they get a Republican in there that has some courage. And number 3, before the Ukraine goes to NATO. Because obviously Article 5, any attack on a NATO country is, we have to go defend. Whether that would happen or not, I don't know, but that's what we signed up to do. In order to counter the sanctions they put on, he's redirected his economy in 3 ways. And in my article, I predicted, and unfortunately came true. He struck a deal with China to do a pipeline and sell his oil through China, and basically making up his revenue is what he's losing from. He's selling military equipment. That's why he's increasing the military budget. He has to make up the deficit from the price, the drop of oil. So he's doing this through flooding the market, number 1. Number 2, selling military equipment. But number 3, what he's doing is they lost their agrarian capability when they started becoming westernized and getting all their produce, et cetera, from the EU. Well, now he is imposing counter sanctions. He's not importing anything from the EU. Now that's really hurt him. I mean, there's dairy, there's cheese, there's apples, all kinds of vegetables that are rotting in Poland and everywhere else. So the sanctions that he's putting on is backfiring. He has to put up a multi-front political approach. Now, I don't know, does everybody know where the Baltic states are? These are the Baltic states. These all were once part of Russia. As you can see, fresh water here, where they have to have it. They have access for shipping, and as I know just too well, all Russia's forward air defense bases are in here. Because I had to defend them. I had to go there. So they need those bases back, and they need a ring fence against Europe. They need these again to have a ring fence, because now down here they have Ukraine. So they need that ring fence against the EU. And again, they have to stop these from going into NATO. So that's part of his soft policy. Putin does not want to risk a fight with the EU militarily or with NATO, nor does he want to risk, the United States becoming more aggressive. So he's using surrogates like he's doing in Ukraine. Now, one of the things that he's going to be doing, and again, hopefully I'm wrong, but he's going to stage his military along the border of all those, just like he did in Ukraine, and use his individuals that are inside politically to subvert the countries. Now, one of the things you always heard why he invaded Ukraine was because he's protecting the Russian people. There's only 2% of that population Russian. In here, the smallest you have is 25%. So now he has even more legitimate reason to try and get them back, beside the fact that the country believes that they should come back. One other terrifying thing that I've heard from my sources is they also want Finland. Finland used to be part of Russia a long time ago. They want it back. How they could do that, I have no idea, but that's part of his soft military policy. here are the things that Russia U.S. should have done if they wanted to stop the incursion in Ukraine, as well as not hurt Russia's economically, because that hurts us and the EU. They need to impose import embargoes, not just financial sanctions, which they're not doing. They should not impose financial sanctions on Russia, because that only genders counter-sanctions. They need to get the EU to be unified in the condemnation of what they're doing, because right now they're not. They're just not. They need to set sanctions on import-export of military products, and we can do that through our programs with China and other countries. We need to set sanctions on the export of Russian oil, not try and stop them, but export controls on the Russian oil. And the production of hardware and oil-producing services. So we can stop that, because most of their hardware comes from either EU, actually the United States, or some of the other countries. We need to establish a monetary fund to help the EU countries that are affected by any Russian counter-sanctions. And we can do that with the EMX, Import-Export Bank. We can do that easily. We need to limit international monetary funds flowing from Russia. One of the things, again, that hopefully I'm wrong, but what he's going to end up doing, right now, unless oil comes back up to $90 a barrel, he's underwater, and he only has 2 years left of export capital to survive through this. And if the oil goes back up to 90, he's in great shape. But if it doesn't, he's going to have to find a way to get that oil revenue back. And what they're doing is they're putting pressure on EU and the United States by doing dollar dumps. You know what that is? That all their money, since the ruble is declining in valuation and inflation is going up. In fact, they just now increased their interest rates to 17% to try and stop the deflation. What they need to do is, and I'm afraid they're working with China to do that now, because they hold a lot of our dollars. They're going to flood the market with dollars to decrease our valuation, what's going to happen to us, and our interest rates are going to go up to stop the devaluation. So these are the kind of things that he's going to be doing if we don't do a smart foreign policy with him. It's not our intent to destroy Russia, it's our intent to entice them not to do what they're doing, and our foreign policy is not geared to doing that. We need to prohibit importation of EU food supplies into Russia. If you do that with the Import-Export Bank fund to help them offset their losses, we could do that. Limit the immigration of Russian people, because right now all those people are taking their rubles and their dollars, and they're doing business in the EU and dumping their dollars in offshore, basically what they're doing, so that they can protect themselves in case the ruble totally crashes. They're going to have dollars. They need to limit the immigration. They need to limit the incursion and expansion of Russian corporations in the U.S. Right now, we have no prohibition on Russian, obviously, with uranium purchases. We have no limitation on them buying products or companies here, and then they get the access to the dollars and they park it in the EU and they use it against us. We don't have any of that going on. We need to provide significant military equipment and arms to help the Ukrainian government, which we're not doing. And we also need to start doing more. We're doing some, but we need to do more NATO events in the Baltics to stop them. But unfortunately, in order to do that, they have a lot of patience. They'll wait till our exercises are over, and then they're going to be right back to where they were. They can wait for. All right. Again, like I said, I'll finish up on Russia. Their economy is to obtain. Their goals for economy is to obtain control goods and services, to expand their economy, control exports to the EU to weaken the EU's hold on them, prop up the Russian monetary condition. Militarily, they need to provide this ring fence against the EU. They need to improve their strategic presence in all these countries, and they need to limit NATO and EU's incursion into these countries. There's a whole host of political things which I won't go into, but what they're going to be doing is they're going to be putting more and more pressure on these countries to at least stay out of NATO, so that they can bide their time and then he can use that as a bargaining chip for whoever the next president is. The other thing that we should be doing again, which Obama already did, is threaten them by putting in the missile defense shields. Put them back in. He fears that most. Let's skip over. Let's go to good stuff. Long and carry. Something everyone's afraid of.
How does the dollar dump work?
Pardon?
They start dumping the US dollars to drive our value down. Our Fed's been doing that for years, to make us competitive with the rest of the world. How does that hurt us?
But if they do a dollar dump?
Yeah, if they do it. We're doing it ourselves. We just stopped recently with the quantitative easing.
Yeah, but we're doing it internally, and we can control it. And every 3 months or so, they do control it. But if you have all these companies and the governments like China and Russia getting all this money from outside their country, they call it offshoring. And by the way, they're putting in offshoring laws to do it, so that any company that they even own 10% in, they have to claim that profits back to the government so that they get taxed on it, which is going to raise about $4 trillion for them.
That's the US or Russia?
Russia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because the US is trying to do
Yeah, we're trying to do it the reverse way. Bring it back in without taxes.
And tax
Yeah, they're
it.
going to tax it.
Obama wants it.
Yes, exactly. But the way the dollar dump works is as an example, China holds a lot of our, and they just make demands. And so unless we either keep printing money, to pay them, in other words, right now, they get their bonds and their money in due course. If they start demanding, that's going to start increasing the demand for dollars, okay?
By wanting to exchange their bonds for dollars.
No, because and it's going to increase, the Fed's going to have to increase to start printing money so that they can, see what I'm saying? So it's going to increase the amount of circulation of the US dollars, which is going to increase the value of the dollars. Yeah. So that's what they're going to do, and they're going to do it through oil as well in the EU, because right now the EU primarily deals with dollars, which is another monetary control situation we have to get over. Did that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.